Hello, hello. We have made it to the top 10 albums of the 1970s in this countdown of the 70 albums as voted by you and Johnny Radio and Nathaniel Ahart. And as you can see, we have a very, very special guest with us today. And I'm so happy to have this guy on the channel because I really have been watching his channel for some time and absolutely amazing videos, 10-minute records. We have Mr. Allan Castle himself. How are you doing, my friend?
Very well, thanks, Nathaniel, and totally have been digging your series and appreciate the invitation and looking forward to a zesty conversation here.
That's a good word for it, zesty.
Zesty, that is nice.
Let's bring the sauce, baby.
Definitely, and yeah, big fan, Allan. This is a dream come true, man. Everyone should go check out his channel right away. 10-minute reviews. It's amazing how much information he packs into such a short amount of time, and so many great albums that he talks about. So thank you for being here, and yeah, let's get into it, man.
My pleasure for inviting me.
Absolutely. And really, I just love how concise your work is once again. So definitely check out 10-minute record reviews after you check out this video here today. So let's get right into it, guys, starting with number 10. Blood on the Tracks by Bob Dylan. The only Dylan album to make this list, but hey, he cracked the top 10 again, and you shouldn't be surprised about it. I mean, honestly, I'll say right off the top, I think this is Dylan's best record from top to bottom. Sure, the songwriting isn't quite at the level of proficiency that it was when he was writing Highway 61, but I just think consistency is key when it comes to this album. And still, this is some of the best lyrics he has ever penned, which I think is saying so much coming from a songwriter as legendary as Bob Dylan. He's just starting with that opening track, Tangled Up in Blue, which is one of my absolute favorite Dylan songs, and I think my favorite on this album. That early one morning the sun was shining, I was laying in bed. You know, everybody knows this song. It's only a few chords, but it's so memorable. And also just the way he kind of like supposedly tells this narrative out of sequential order. Like he was doing some French New Wave thing. I don't know, but it is really one of his absolute best songs. So investing. But important thing we have to mention about this album was he was going through a divorce at the time with his wife Sarah, and now he says he was influenced by some Russian poet. I don't believe that nonsense. I mean, Jacob Dylan even said like this album is like my parents talking to each other, and you hear it, just the vitriol that is just permeates these songs, and also just the sadness on songs like Simple Twist of Fate. It's so melancholy but so underplayed and so beautiful, because obviously this is more closer to his folk stuff than it is his rock stuff, but it's kind of like that bridge, you know, and it just these really intense and very you know, as I said, bitter ballads. You're a Big Girl Now also, I think, features one of Dylan's absolute best vocal performances. Like how he's like, whoa, you know, and I was like, blows my mind, because you know, when you think of Dylan as a singer, you don't obviously think he's like the best vocalist, but there it shows that he was
very
really
impassioned, to say the least. I mean, if not, you know, yeah,
man. And talk about passion, you know, Idiot Wind, I think is one of his absolute best songs, and just how intense and like when he's like saying, you know, I kissed goodbye the howling beast on the borderline. You're like, oh my goodness, like he really isn't holding back any punches, especially when it comes to this relationship. But really, so many, and then some more upbeat songs like You're Going to Make Me Lonesome When You Go, which also sounds like another song on this album that's also great. Then you have the outlier on the album, which I still think is amazing, Lily Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts, which if you need any further proof how amazing of a storyteller Dylan is, this is really such a great narrative piece. Really one of the best stories he's ever told. And then, of course, heartbreaking ballads like If You See Her, Say Hello. And then, of course, one of his most iconic songs, again, on this album, Shelter from the Storm, which, you know, there's the song that sounds similar to the earlier one, but obviously one of his absolute most iconic songs.
That's my favorite.
Very well.
Yeah.
That's your I can't blame you for that at all, man. It's definitely like top 3 tracks on this album. And really, I mean, none of these tracks are weak, though. I think Meet Me in the Morning is just kind of a little bit of a rote blues number. But other than that, there's not a weak track on this album. This is really one of the greatest albums ever made. Though it didn't quite make my top 10, I'm so beyond happy to see it. And honestly, we shouldn't be surprised it's this high on the list.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think, Alan? What is this one of your favorite Dylan records?
Well, I got to tell you, I mean, I think Dylan is a matter of taste, right? And I mean, as Nathaniel, you were saying, some people don't, think of Bob Dylan as a great singer. Some people don't really think of him as a singer, particularly, right? He's a poet with a guitar who happens to have a harmonica that he blows into occasionally, right? But I don't say that to trivialize him, because clearly his impact on popular music is well, one of those people you might arguably say second to none.
Yeah.
But for me, my interest in Dylan is already starting to wane by the time you get to Nashville Skyline and into the 70s. I never really was that interested. I agree, this is a good record. I think it's probably the best thing that he did after the 1960s. It's, as you say, it's very clearly autobiographical. You guys are a little too young maybe to have gone through divorces and so on, but I will say people aren't at their best when they're going through that period. And it's a risky thing to start recording all of your thoughts at that time, because, with the passage of time, your views and the views of others may change. And so no wonder he's now backing away and saying, well, actually, it's about whatever, Hippocrates or something, or whatever he says it's about, but it's not, as his son knows, there are some great tracks on here. But for me, I was actually, when we were corresponding about this, Nathaniel, I was saying, actually, this is a record that doesn't even make my top 70 of the 70s. But that's really a personal taste thing. And it's, but I got to say, I do love Tangled Up in Blue. I think that's a great tune. I do love, my favorite track on this is Shelter from the Storm. But for me, and even the Dylan stuff that I really liked earlier in the 60s, it's a tough slog to get through two sides of a record with nothing but Dylan singing for me. I think I usually have to take a break and have a stretch and then come back to it. So,
that's understandable.
So, good record, not my flavor, but definitely a solid record. I know a lot of people love it. So,
I do think you respect it,
Oh yeah, of course. And I mean, it is a little long at like over 50 minutes. I think he probably could have cut at least one track off the runtime. But, for me, I had this towards the bottom of my list. I got to respect it. It's not one of my favorite Dylan records. It doesn't make my top 5. Actually, I like Desire a little more than this one, which came out, I believe, a year after, which also is very kind of impassioned folk music, and I think goes into some other territories that isn't as, sad, I guess you could say, based on the subject matter. But then again, I totally get it, for especially having gone through a divorce myself. People can relate to a lot of these songs, and whether it's Idiot Wind, which is more scathing, or Shelter from the Storm, which is just more beautiful and universal. I think there's a lot to love here.
Yeah, he's back and forth, as one is at a time like that, right? So it is, in that way, it is a fascinating record because it is such a lens into the artist at that particular moment, for sure.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's why I love it so much, because obviously, like, listen to Highway 61, it's kind of impersonal. I mean, it's still amazing, but I think this one was really like his most personal. And I think that's why, like, I love it so much, because I can really feel his pain. And I think if an artist makes me feel that, that all to him, like, I got to give him all the credit. And I think we might be talking about something like that real soon. So without further ado, let's get into number 9.
Blue by Joni Mitchell. Absolutely deserves to be in the top 10. It's on my wall of perfect albums, as you can see right here. I give this a 10 out of 10. And that was such a great segue, Nathaniel, because this is another folky breakup album right after Blood on the Tracks. And I do think this is the better of the two, me personally. I think Joni Mitchell, just, it was like lightning in a bottle on this one. Although, I mean, she had plenty of great albums, throughout the 70s and beyond. But this one, I don't think she ever quite matched. Just every single song on here has something important to say. from the opener of All I Want, which is such a upbeat, beautiful acoustic song just about love, and then going straight into My Old Man, which is kind of like this quirky piano led tune. And I just love how stripped back, not just musically but also lyrically, like she's just thrown it all out there. Her emotions, like in My Old Man, when she says, when he's gone, the bed's too big, the frying pan's too wide, or maybe I have that backwards.
But still, it's such a great line.
Yeah, so awesome. But I mean, every single song is brilliant on here. But I mean, the title track is just devastating and heartbreaking. Little Green as well, about having to give up her daughter for adoption. And then, it goes through every emotion imaginable throughout this album. California is very upbeat, as is Carrie. But then you've got River, where she's saying, I wish I had a river I could skate away on. And of course, closing with The Last Time I Saw Richard. This is my personal favorite breakup album ever made. And I think it's timeless. It's perfect. There's not many other albums in the folk genre that reach this height for me personally. So glad to see it made it this high.
I absolutely agree with you, because I actually have this right above Blood on the Tracks. Like, I think it's one spot above. So I think that works out really well. But yeah, I mean, if you need proof that Joni Mitchell is one of the greatest, absolute greatest songwriters of all time, just listen to this album. It's so personal, and it's just literally, as you said, she lays everything out. I think there's a great Chris Christopherson quote where he was basically saying, "It's like, geez, Joni, leave something for yourself." But really, I mean, you get like some of the most like soul revealing songs, and especially Little Green, which is one of my favorite songs of all time, though I may have heard it too many times because I'm just so drawn to it. And the first time I heard this song, I saw it in a movie once, but when I actually sat down and listened to it, I was almost moved to tears. I think I did cry a little bit because, I can sort of relate to it, because, get a little personal here, but I never knew my father. So I was kind of like, oh my goodness, he's leaving this mother alone. But then when I read it later on, I found out she had to give up the baby. I was even more devastated. I was like, what? Yeah. And it's just the chord, like the way she tunes her guitar and plays. I mean, nobody sounds like Joni Mitchell on guitar, but really just like, I love that line where she's like, there'll be icicles and birthday clothes. It's like trying to set up this, these really pleasing things. It's like, but sometimes there'll be sorrow, and you kind of slip the pessimism. I mean, it's such a sobering line, and I think one of the greatest Joni Mitchell lyrics ever. But you could say that about A Case of You as well, which is just so beautiful, and just kind of like getting the perspective of these lovers that aren't really connecting. And I love that verse. The way she'll like play with words, she'll like hold out a phrase, and then she'll like add something on the end of it to kind of surprise you. I mean, nobody writes songs like that except her. But I could go on and on.
And that voice, man, I didn't even mention.
Oh my goodness,
nobody sounds like her. That soprano is just, it's something else.
It really one of the greatest. Though I think sometimes when she gets into her falsetto, I'm not on the title track, I'm not really huge on it. It's a little rough, but throughout this whole album, man, just listen to her sing California, and you're just like, oh man, I mean, what a lovely tune,
You want to go there, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Sitting with people reading Rolling Stone, reading Vogue. I mean, I absolutely love almost every single song on this album, and I can certainly get behind you saying it's the best breakup album of all time. I mean, The River alone, with that interpolation of Jingle Bells, and then as you said, I wish I'd find a river I could skate away on. It's so heartbreaking. One of the best Christmas songs of all time too. But I've said enough. I want to hear your thoughts on this, Allan, being a Canadian yourself.
Yeah, well, Joni is of course a source of national pride for all of us, really, and she actually doesn't live too far from here these days at points. I think it's a spectacular record, and it, as you guys have said, she mines her own personal life. I mean, frankly, one of the worst jobs in the world has got to be being a Joni Mitchell boyfriend, because you know
Yeah.
at some point, you're right, your own vicissitudes and struggles are going to get laid out on vinyl at some point. And
Yeah.
you know, and this is a woman who had basically all of the sort of the alpha dudes of the rock world chasing after her in the late 60s, right? And she basically loved and left them all. You know, and they're all bereft, and they've all, you know, David Crosby got a song, and Graham Nash has got a song, and all these guys, there's songs in here, right, about these, we're not necessarily this record, but about them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, have you ever heard the story where she performed a song at a party and it was about breaking up with David Crosby, and he was there, and like he didn't know she was breaking up with him?
I heard
I was
about
like,
that.
oh my goodness,
Yeah.
that's
I didn't
brutal.
know that, but that is classic, classic Joni Mitchell. Yeah, it's remarkable. It's I think there are some other competitors. I think Court and Spark is a pretty good record too, but this I think is, I would say, is her best. She's another person too. I mean, she's very intense to listen to. I love her music. And this is a great album, but when you've listened to it, you're like, okay, I think I need to do a cleanse or something. I gotta go listen to something. I gotta put on the Iron Maiden or something like that, right? Because you can't help but engage emotionally, and so it is in some respects almost tiring sometimes to listen to Joni, because she does ask a lot of herself and she asks a lot of the listener. But yeah, I think it's amazing, and she plays dulcimer here too, I think, here and there as well.
I think on the opening track she does All I Want.
Yeah,
That
so
makes sense.
so she's playing, you know, whatever, 3 or 4 instruments on here as well as the singing, right? I mean, just an incredibly talented human being. I mean, I don't think as talented in love as she is, you know, in
Right,
music,
right.
but we all
It works to her advantage.
It helps her art, you know, and that's why this album is this high on the list, and I think deservedly so. I think this is at a great spot, and I couldn't argue it myself. So yeah,
Definitely.
guys, that will take us right into number 8.
We don't need no education.
The Wall by Pink Floyd. Yeah, I wouldn't have this album this high, but I had it on my list, and yeah, I love it regardless. I will say right off the bat, it has its pretensions about it that I'm not necessarily huge on. I'm not a huge fan of the Roger Waters vocal. He's basically kind of doing a shitty Dylan. That's what I like to call it. So I take that for whatever that's worth. But I'll tell you, I think this is Pink Floyd's most ambitious album. I mean, there's so many different styles on here. And I think I will say the first side is easily the strongest, starting with In the Flesh, then Thin Ice, and Another Brick in the Wall. I mean, especially part 2 is like maybe their most iconic song, that we don't need no education. I mean, like, even if you don't know Pink Floyd, I feel like you got to know that song. And their most disco oriented track, funnily enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have beautiful songs like Mother, which really sets up this overprotectiveness of this mother character and the effect it has on this child. And then going into side 2, I gotta say Goodbye Blue Sky is one of the most beautiful, most haunting Floyd songs, because it starts off with that major chord version, that whoo, and then of course you get did you ever see the falling bombs, and then it just, this stark contrast goes straight into minor, and it's just really one of the most jarring but most effective songs in their entire discography. But so much great stuff. Young Lust is great. And obviously you see the degradation of Pink, and kind of putting up this metaphorical wall against him in the world, and kind of like going insane to the point he throws a fascist rally or something. I mean, this album is crazy, but I think it's very easy to follow. That is the one thing I'll give it, despite all its pretensions. It is an incredibly easy album, is a concept album to kind of get into in that sense. But yeah, I mean, so many great songs, and of course you got to talk about Comfortably Numb, which some people say David Gilmour on that is one of the greatest guitar solos of all time. I don't even know if I would consider it his greatest, but it's certainly up there as being one of the best. And then so many just powerful tracks. I mean, The Trial is like so boisterous and so operatic in scope, but I think so different from anything Pink Floyd has done, and that's what I absolutely love about it, even though you can't fully hear the vocals 100% of the time. And I just love how he has to realize that he kind of has to embrace love and break down these walls to make his life better. I mean, it really is very, very complex story with a lot of layers to it, but I think the presentation of it sometimes doesn't always warrant its runtime or some of the choices Roger Waters did with his voice. But I mean, this is this is the way to end such a classic run of albums, and actually my least favorite of theirs from Dark Side onwards, or at least to this period, but I certainly wouldn't negate it at all. This is an absolute classic.
Yeah, I mean, from a storytelling perspective, it's brilliant. I do think as a double album, it is pretty bloated in its runtime, especially towards the second half when they're throwing in like these bring the boys home and kind of getting away from the main storyline a little bit. And they aren't the stronger songs anyway, but some of their best tracks. I mean, you can't argue Comfortably Numb, not just a guitar solo, but Gilmour, when he comes in vocally, it's such a breath of fresh air, because
after Roger Waters
does sing too much on this album. So, which, I'm not necessarily like anti-Waters. Like, I think his voice works well in certain spots, especially in what he's trying to do on this record, like the white nationalist rants and things towards the end kind of works with his voice. But it is a crazy story. The movie is even crazier, actually,
just
like
as good,
visually.
I think.
And it gives you some more perspective on it. But I'm not surprised it's this high. It wasn't this high on my list either. I wouldn't say it's my least favorite of the period, but yeah, you gotta respect it, man.
I don't think it should be above Blue or Blood on the Tracks, though.
No, I don't
interject there. So
yeah, I mean, I would say this is a record which, in terms of Pink Floyd records in the 70s, I would comfortably put it behind Dark Side, comfortably put it behind Animals, and Wish You Were Here. Right? Yeah, I mean, I think those. I mean, I find those are all significantly better. Personally, I mean, you're right. There are a few good tracks in here. I don't even think there are necessarily enough good tracks, if this were a single album, to say this is a really great record. I think you have you could probably put together one really banging side of songs, and then you'd have some okay songs on the second side, and you'd probably give that record a B. But the rest of it is just fucking depressing, right? and I have to say that it's funny, because I was just interacting with some folks on the internet earlier today, and about, because I guess Roger Waters has popped off about Drake, and saying, that I guess he came to Toronto and he gave a concert and nobody wrote it up. There was no review because Drake was playing and nobody paid attention to Roger Waters. So I guess he starts to talk about how he's far more important historically than Drake and all the rest of it. And I'm not going to weigh in on Drake either way. I've got no issue with Drake, but don't really have a lot of opinions because I'm an old guy. But I will say that Floyd, maybe this is a controversial opinion, is more so than probably, if you think of like the top 10 British bands of all time, I would say Floyd's position is most tenuous in terms of like lasting impact. They're most the creatures of their time compared to Zeppelin, The Who, The Stones, The Beatles, Sabbath, otherwise, who I all think all of whom I think continue to gain adherence. Whereas Floyd is, I think if you were doing a lot of drugs in 1972, it was awesome. But I don't know. I mean, I go back to it, listen to it, go, these records all have their moments. But even Dark Side, right? Which again, which is a side issue of this conversation. But I find sometimes I go back and what's all the fuss about here, right? And so they also came along.
Controversial statements, indeed.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I have all these Floyd records, right? But these records came along at a time when FM radio had just gone boom, and so suddenly you could play like a whole album side of tripped out music in late at night or in the evening or whatever. And Floyd records are perfect for that, right? Because they kind of Dark Side segues from one song to another. So is this one, right? So does The Wall. And so they were trippy, but in the end, do I find myself pulling this one up to listen to it? Not so much. I think I'd much rather listen to Wish You Were Here, given the choice. So me,
I agree with you.
I reviewed this. I think I gave it like a 3.5, something like that. It's,
Wow. Okay.
not one of my faves. So
Yeah, and from a
curmudgeon.
no, not at all. No, when I get what you're saying about it being depressing, which it's kind of funny. All three of the albums so far in this episode have been pretty darn depressing, but this one may take the cake actually in that regard, because it's this guy slowly descending into madness over 2 albums, and truly
Madness
and fascism.
Yeah.
Yes,
the fascism definitely has another element.
And Waters himself was kind of becoming a fascist within the band at this time.
And absolutely.
Really, he wasn't even letting Richard Wright play keyboards on certain songs. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
it's insane. So sadly, that kind of from here on out, the band was kind of more or less had written their own ticket home after this, but there's certainly some stellar songs here, but it's not on par with Dark Side for sure.
But if there was more Gilmore, if there was 50% more Gilmore on this, than there is, or even 100% more Gilmore than there is, it'd be a lot better. It's too imbalanced, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, and Waters is a great artist, but there's somebody needed to say at some point, like, give it a rest, create some room, and might have been more successful, I think. But well, it was very successful, but I might have liked it better.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I will disagree with you a little bit when it comes to lasting impact, because one thing I've noticed, especially in my generation, for a lot of people who don't listen to rock music, like I don't hear people talking about, and regrettably so, especially the Who, I don't hear a lot of people talking about them as much, or Sabbath. I still hear Zeppelin thrown around quite a bit, but I don't know, like everyone seems to know Floyd and listens to their records, at least, a lot more people my age than, some of these other bands. So I think influence wise and long lasting impact, I definitely think they have the edge over a lot of, definitely not the Beatles though, but definitely a few of the bands you mentioned. I think they've kind of like, I guess, superseded their impact. I'm not saying that they're better than the Who necessarily. I do like the Who more, but they're still one of my favorite bands of all time. And I don't know, man, when I heard Dark Side of the Moon, well, I might talk about that some other time. I already talked about it enough, so
yeah, we'll talk about it more eventually. But yeah. Cool.
But all right, still great choice. Glad to see it on the list, though it should be a little lower. That's fine with me. All right, guys, let's move on to number 7.
So David Bowie, the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, often forgotten in all of that. But and I luckily actually have I bought the recent Parlophone reissue, because I had like a cheapo Best Buy budget buy whatever issue, which was not so good. This one sounds great. This is, I think, his best record. I don't think that's a very controversial statement. It's also, and there are phases of Bowie which I really dig, and phases which I don't. I do this series with another guy from Sweden where we talk about records, and the other day we were talking about Low. Which again, this episode of this series is apparently all about depressing records. Low is a very depressing record. This one is, as we were just chatting about on the break, also a slightly depressing record, but depressing in a different way. But I actually don't find it depressing, because for me, it encapsulates the best of Bowie in one of the best musical periods that there was, which was the glam rock period, right? Where there's all kinds of, well, first of all, fantastic musicianship, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I think when you listen to this record, yes, Bowie's great, but Mick Ronson is also incredible, right? It just drives this,
makes this album.
Yeah. Totally. And you guys, if you haven't seen the video from the 73 Hammersmith Odeon concert, where with the whole Spiders band on YouTube, that is amazing. In particular, the version of Moon Age Daydream on that video, on that concert is so cool. I don't know if it's been released on that particular concert on a record. Do you guys have the Santa Monica live record, the Bowie one, which came out recently? Anyway, that's got, which is around the same era as this, and has incredible live versions of these songs, which did so well. But I think this is fantastic. It's again, it's also a bit of an arc. I frankly think it's a slightly more interesting concept album than The Wall, and maybe a lot of other concept albums, because again, it's kind of coherent in some respects. Yeah, it's depressing, but of course it was depressing in 1972, where, oh, the world's ending, like that was some sort of fantastical thing that could never happen. Well, here we are 50 years later, and we'll see what happens in the next couple of years. So maybe it starts to become a little more depressing as these things seem to take on an era of reality. Anyway, I love it. Never get tired of listening to this. It was one of the very first records I remember hearing as a kid, and it's never really left me. And so I'm not surprised it's as high as number 7. Could even be as high as number 6.
Yeah, which at some point it was, I think, even in the top 5 as votes were still coming in, and I was not surprised at all, because another one that's just timeless and has a sound of its own. I mean, just the opening track, 5 Years, which is, I think, my personal favorite.
Really?
I love the way that song builds, and Bowie's vocal performance, I think, is just nuts. Like when he's really just going full on 5 years at the end. I love that. And the imagery, even though some of it is almost nonsensical, you visualize everything that he's talking about in the song. I think it's incredible. And it's been covered by some others, but I don't think anyone touches the original. And of course, Starman is another beautiful track. The strings on it take it to another level. Ziggy Stardust's title track, such a cool guitar riff. And even though there are some depressing elements on the record, there's a lot of upbeat, fun stuff like that. Ziggy played guitar. It's so fun, man. I love it. So I'm cool with it being this high, even though it wasn't this high on my list. But
have you heard the Bauhaus cover of Ziggy Stardust?
I don't think so.
If not, make a point of it. It's a very faithful cover.
Okay.
But it's definitely worth a listen for sure.
Okay.
What
cool.
do you think, Daniel?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't think my statement about this album will be as controversial as your statements on Floyd, but I hate to rain on your guys' parade a little bit, because I actually just listened to this album, and I don't quite love it. And it's interesting because I do find it to be a really, really quality record. Obviously, it's a seminal classic, but I just feel like not all the songs. I think maybe some of it is the production, where Bowie's vocals are kind of drowned in the mix a little bit when he's kind of like yelling. It's kind of hard to understand him a little bit. But I also think as a concept album, it doesn't fully come together, because he put it together after the fact as a concept album, and you can kind of tell because some of the songs don't really have anything to do with each other, especially near the beginning. But obviously the stuff that works on this album is really great. And I don't love 5 Years, but I do think it's really good. So I was a little surprised by your statement, just in my frame of mind. I was like, oh wow, really? Because I'll tell you, my favorite tracks on here, Moon Age Daydream is absolutely amazing. Dude, when the sax come in, it's just so incredible. And just such I'm an alligator, I'm a mama papa coming for you. Just his vocals on it are just, and the lyrics are just so crazy. But Starman, I think is the best song on this album, and one of his most memorable. There's a star man waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he'd know he'd blow our minds. It's just so amazing. That song, so catchy. One of his, and then of course that la 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 la. Everybody knows the song, even if you don't know Bowie. Incredible. But I also love Lady Stardust. It is just really, really great. Probably one of the more narrative pieces on the album, and just kind of how he creates that androgyny that he became so well known for establishing and influencing other artists who I think are even greater, like Prince, perhaps. But I just loved, the piano riff on there, and then the way that the drum beat later just lays in so perfectly in between that track. I just think is incredible, and a great story song, obviously. I also really love the title track, like you said, like that. Down, 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 you know, just such a. I mean, once again, Mick Ronson, man. I mean, just what an incredible and somewhat underrated guitarist, because I don't hear him get thrown around a lot with the best. I also think Suffragette City is pretty great as well. And also some really funny lines he throws in there. But yeah, you know, I think this is obviously the most influential glam rock album. But if I were to say, I still think Transformer is the best by far. And look, I do love Bowie. I really do. I just never been into his music as much as everyone else's. But obviously, he was a genius, and really, what a interesting, what a complex human being. I absolutely loved him as a person. Too bad he's not with us anymore. But really, it's not. I actually like Hunky Dory and Aladdin Sane more than this. One of which did make this list. But you know, I can't argue it being on the list. I just wouldn't put it in the top 10 personally, but I get why everyone loves this album, and I won't make too much of a fuss about it.
Yeah, and his voice is, you know, like actually all the other artists we've discussed so far today, also a bit of an acquired taste. Like, I know that may be surprising to say, because some people think he's like one of the best rock vocalists of all time, but
I think you're right. It's a little bit it's a little bit anti-singing. You don't get Robert Smith or Morrissey without having had Bowie before, right? Yeah, and there's a very English way of singing. Actually, a lot of those bands. It's almost like it would be uncool to just sing normally and sort of cheerfully, and so you have to add this sort of angsty, ironic catch in your throat or what have you. But yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And obviously, you know, this inspired many bands right after the fact, but continuing to be an influence on this day. I mean, if you haven't seen The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, the Wes Anderson movie yet, which I know you haven't, but yeah, it's so cool. All the Sue George covers throughout the I won't spoil it for you, but so good, so cool. So glad it made it.
Still a classic album nonetheless. So yeah, guys, that's going to take us right into number 6.
Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder, the double album masterpiece, yet another 10 out of 10 in my book. I absolutely love it. I think actually this is my favorite double album of all time, and of course this is my favorite Stevie album. I just think he got to, I mean, his 70s output was just unreal, and he just kept getting better and better, and this, I think, was the apex. There is not a weak song on here. There's so many different styles of music throughout to keep it interesting. You know, starting off with just the very kind of low-key, gospel-y Love's in Need of Love Today, which is such a simple message, but a needed one still to this day. And I think, you know, love just permeates throughout this album. This is definitely taking a turn from the depressing records we've been talking about, even though, you know, there's some, you know, heavy stuff on here, but for sure, I mean, songs like Sir Duke might be that one of the happiest songs ever made. Horns, I mean, the horns are just unreal on this thing. I think is one of the most fun funk rock songs of all time. That bass riff, that doom 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 doom. I mean, come on, man. And his keyboard playing, his drum playing is through the roof. All those drum fills towards the end. Again, the horns taking it to another level. Pastime Paradise, which of course was later taken by Coolio to make Gangster's Paradise. Which was cool, but I think there's a lot more lyrically to this original song. And I mean, come on, Isn't She Lovely? One of his greatest ballads that's also makes you want to dance, and it's upbeat. I even love Joy Inside My Tears, which, you know, it's a little long and kind of on the sadder side of things, but his vocal performance is just incredible. I mean, it's Stevie Wonder. Come on, you got one of the greatest longer songs, followed by another 7+ minute song, Another Star, which has this Latin vibe. I mean, the man was a genius. He was a wonder. And this is just total proof of that. I could go on and on. I do have to say though, I saw him perform this live on the Songs
Oh
in
man.
the Key of Life tour a couple years back, and they played this whole album in sequence, then another hour of hits, and it was just like, it was the greatest concert I've ever seen. So that may be what took it over the top for me of being like one of my favorite albums of all time. But gotta love it. And so I wish it made the top 5, but I'm not mad that it's 6. This is fine.
Well, it made my top 10. It was a bit lower down, but I couldn't be happier to see Stevie Wonder this high on the list. Though I think, you know, Stevie Wonder should have at least be in the top 5, because I think he is the single greatest solo artist to ever walk the face of this planet. I've gone on record saying that so many times. And this is definitely my second favorite Stevie Wonder album after Intervisions. I mean, how can you not love this thing? I mean, this is like the perfect example of having an album filled chock full of songs and not having it feel that long. Though I think the extra EP he throws on, I think gets a little, like, some of the songs on there I wouldn't say I love. I will say Joy Inside My Tears is like probably my least favorite on here. I think it's kind of okay. It's a little dull, I think, musically, and a little monotonous. But besides that, every single track on here is just phenomenal. I mean, as you said, Love's Anita, Love Today. How can you not love that message and that song? But so many spiritual songs. I think Have a Talk with God is great. Contusion is like, when I first heard it, I'm like, this sounds like Mario Kart music. That's what I'm saying. Nintendo like steals all these like these literal like kind of obscure tracks and like kind of like make them influences on their own music, which I find very interesting. But the most pessimistic song on this whole album is really one of the standouts for me. That's Village Ghetto Land, which is the best way I like to call it, is Baroque synth. It's just so disturbing, you know, just his vocals. It's so clear, like broken glasses everywhere. It's some bloody scene. You know, you just feel the passion. It's just so critical of everything going on at the time, and still unfortunately going on to this day. Just an absolute stunner of a track. But as you said, the classic Sir Duke, one of the greatest celebrations of music ever, especially on a song that's so or an album that's so life affirming and joyous. I Wish is one of the best nostalgia ridden songs I've ever heard in my entire life, and as you said, one of the funkiest grooves you'll ever hear put on record. But I think one of the greatest songs of all time, yet again, I could say that about like at least 5 songs on this album, Knocks Me Off My Feet is one of his absolute best ballads. I mean, just the composition, like the verse, the bridge, you know, that middle 8, and then the I don't want to bore you with it. I mean, it's just amazing. But the way he describes the love, like, I see us in the park, you know, well, actually, no, we lay beneath the stars under the lover's tree that's seen through the eyes of my mind. I mean, what a way to describe his blindness is something that isn't necessarily a hinderment, but something that kind of gives him this sixth sense, if you will. I mean, it's just such one of the greatest ballads ever written. Pastime Paradise, the way he plays with words and rhyme, I mean, just crazy how concise of a statement he can make with all these words that sound very similar to each other. Summer Soft, another amazing ballad, and yet again, the composition on this thing is just unbelievable. Ordinary Pain is great because you get the, you know, a multi-perspective song. It seems like a regular love song, but then you get the woman's perspective of it, and it adds this whole extra layer and just makes the song so much more complex structurally and musically. Isn't She Lovely is one of my favorite songs of all time, and I think maybe the greatest song besides maybe Little Green that a parent has ever written to their child. And just him playing, I know it goes on for like 6 minutes. I think you might have talked about this, Allan, but I just love, like, just when he's playing, like when he's like giving her a bath in the sink, like you just hear the joys of him being a father. It almost brings me to tears, because that's the thing about this album. It's so life affirming. And of course you have also great other political songs like Black Man, where he runs down the history of, you know, like all these black leaders, and it is just so joyous with all the vocalists in the background yelling out all these people's names who made significant contributions, not just black but white as well, everywhere in between. If It's Magic is just one of his most stunning, just the harps that come in. I've never heard harps on a Stevie Wonder song until here. Then you hear, and if it's magic, then
Yeah.
why can't love be everlasting? I mean,
Yeah.
one of the greatest vocalists ever. I mean, you can't argue that. His runs are perfect. His intonation is always so clear, so concise, so much control of his voice. I can go on and on. But As is my favorite Stevie Wonder song, even though I've heard it so many times. But
Yeah.
just, today I know I'm living, but tomorrow can make me the past. For that, I must, I know deep in my mind the love of me I left behind, but I'll be loving you always. I missed a couple lyrics in there, but really one of the most beautiful statements about love and really just realizing what's the most important is the people in your life and the people who care about you the most. But even without that, I think the world just would, absolutely loves this man, absolutely loves his music. I mean, one of the greatest, most influential artists to ever give us anything, ever lay a track down, a vocal track, or what have you, instrumentals on tape. I mean, this man did it all, and he's blind. And yeah, it's like, it's so inspiring. It's like, well, if he can do this, why can't I? Granted, not everybody is going to be as nearly of a genius as Stevie Wonder. I beg to say nobody will be. But yeah, this is one of the most timeless statements of love and unity and just everything in between. It's really one of the most life affirming records ever made.
Yeah, man. What do you think, Allan?
Well, I mean, full disclosure, I gave this record 5 out of 5 when I reviewed it. So everything I'm going to say should be viewed with that context in mind. I mean, for me, the key thing is that a year or two before this record comes out, he basically sticks up Motown for all they're worth and gets the most ridiculously huge contract that anybody ever signed, and then promptly then disappears for 18 months. Right, working on this record, self-producing, playing all the instruments. No one knows what the hell's going on. Right, they're making T-shirts like, "Where's this record?" This kind of thing, and I do feel, and you alluded a bit to this, Nathaniel. I do feel that he there's nobody looking over his shoulder and editing this, and so there are lots of brilliant ideas here, and many brilliant songs, some of which go on too long, and some of which. I just feel you always get another couple of verses which you might not actually need, and so it's a great listen, but it's that's increasingly over time my feeling. This also is my second favorite Stevie Wonder record, although Intervisions is not my first. Anybody care to guess which is my first?
Talking Book.
Talking Book, exactly. Talking Book, I think. Talking Book is like this record, but with some editing. One disc and melodies to burn, and not I mean I think there are a few weak moments in Talking Book. There are more weak moments on this one. But Talking Book I think is about as flawless a soul record has ever been made, and maybe as flawless a record of any kind as has ever been made. So yeah, I was but again, this I do regret missing that tour that you talked about, John. Friends of mine went to it. They said it was life changing, right? So that would have been great. Yeah. It's a fantastic record and worthy of its spot in the top 10. And and sadly, then it's kind of he has his moments after this, but that's really ultimately kind of it. Like you can, unless you're a serious Stevie Wonder completist, you can kind of stop buying Stevie records after this one. I know I'm probably going to upset a few people, but I think you can, right? So it's the last flourish of before. Well, he's still kind of focused on creating pop songs before he descends into the inner life of plants and various other organisms and so on. For which he never ultimately recovers, except for the odd hit here and there, right? But
like Overjoyed in the 80s I think is brilliant, but there are moments of brilliance versus the full albums worth.
It has a lot has a lot in common with Physical Graffiti, actually. I think
interesting.
In that same way, in that all the breaks were off, and yes, there's lots of gold on here, and yes, it's a great record, but it's also the beginning of the end, really. Right?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think that's no, I just want to say I don't think it's that controversial for you to say that, really, because I've listened up to characters and I was just like, okay, like it's fine. He really ended that run with this album, definitely. But I hope he comes out with a new album soon. He said he's working on music, but are we
That'd
going to
be
see it
awesome.
in the near future? I don't know. I hope he puts it out.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But kudos to the voters for picking this one as high as they did. So
Yeah.
Absolutely deserving
Absolutely.
of being this high on the list. I think we can agree here. And it's like, if this isn't in the top 5, then what is? I mean, I guess
know,
we'll have
man.
to find out next week.
the anticipation is knife edge. Even for those of us who may have an inkling as what the top 5, I still feel that sense of anticipation, nevertheless.
Yeah,
So-
because you never know what that 1 and 2 is, the
Could change.
order. So
Exactly.
So yeah, we'll see, guys. Be sure to tune in next week because this has been a nail biter all the way. And as we said last week, you can already start voting for the top 80 of the 80s. Send those lists in. And man, Allan, thank you so much, man. This has been a
Absolutely, man.
blast.
It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to join you guys. I totally appreciate the invitation. And I will give a shout out to your channels next chance I get on my channel. So
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Yes, and please be sure in the description below to check out Allan's channel, 10-minute record reviews. Such an awesome, you'll be stuck in the rabbit hole for many chunks of 10 minutes at a time. I
Thank you very
promise you.
But yeah,
All right,
guys,
thanks, guys.
thank you again. Really, I'm just, it's such an honor to have you on here. And yeah, guys, that's going to be it for this episode. So once again, tune into John's channel next week to see the final picks that we have on this list, and then we will have the snubs video the week after. So until then, we will see you guys in the next one.
Peace.
Do